Hello, ladies and a few good men, and welcome to today's episode of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast, where today I am really happy to have Steve Furtado here with us. So this is actually only the third episode we've had with a man, but it's really exciting. And I want you to think for a minute before you continue listening. We have talked in the past a little bit about mind-body-spirit connection, but we're going to be talking even more about that today. And what kinds of limits do you think are within that? Do you actually think that you really can only heal from minor issues with that? I know a lot of people do, but today Steve's going to share with us how he overcame a pretty severe autoimmune challenge by learning to embrace the mind body spirit connection. So, welcome to the podcast today, Steve.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully, with today's words, we can inspire others and we can add value to other people's lives. So I'm really excited to have a great conversation with you today, Anna Laura.
For sure, absolutely. So, Steve, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about who you are and what your story is? So, what brings you here to this autoimmune rehab podcast?
So my name is Steve Fertado. So in 2018, I was similarly diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, just like how you were. So it's 5 years now that I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and my mom had started her rheumatoid arthritis journey as well, more or less at the same age. So I had more or less like a 20-year, forecast of what she was going through. And that allowed me to, when it came to my journey, right, I had a little bit of insight, a lot of information, maybe some of it was outdated, but I knew a lot about what she had been gone through. And she went more of a holistic approach of how she healed, and I took some of those recipes, but unfortunately, she didn't have all the ingredients that I think I found was the best solution for me to be able to heal from that.
Yeah, that's great for sure. Absolutely. And I think that's really important that we focus on the fact that, what works for one isn't necessarily going to work for all. And so each individual person has to find their own healing journey or their own methods of what will work for healing. And I know rheumatoid arthritis is something that a lot of people can consider to be pretty severe. And sometimes when people get slapped with that label, it can be like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So, what would you say is the very first thing you did when you got that diagnosis?
So for me, it started off that I had to look at myself. Um, the first thing that I did after going through that physical pain, because I was getting full body inflammation throughout the whole body. And the effects that gave me was more of a psychological challenge where I had to admit to myself that I was lost as a person. Um, and from there, I decided that I needed to change things in my life because in that point, I wasn't taking care of myself physically anymore, busy, just being busy with life, right? Running a young family, having a young family, running a business, just busy, playing in the rat race. And I really took the time to step back and analyze who I was and where I was in my life. And then I decided to make drastic changes. And I shared a little bit of that intro, of that story that changed my life. And if you allow me, I'd like to share it with your guests as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's have at it. I'm sure people would love to hear it because like you mentioned, you had a genetic component there a little bit because your mother had had it, and so you were genetically predispositioned to it. But then as happens with a lot of us, we get caught up in that rat race. We get really stressed out. We all of a sudden get overwhelmed. We have a lot of stuff going on in our lives, and a lot of times those things can be the trigger, if you will, that pulls the gun for the autoimmunity. We may be predispositioned, we may have developed other things, had toxins, trauma, other things, and then all of a sudden that trigger gets pulled by some kind of a thing going off, and then we're like, oh shoot, now I've really got to make some major changes. So tell us, what exactly did you do?
Wake up call. That was a wake up call. So in my journey of saying that I needed to change, and I started looking for help. And obviously, first thing we do, what I did was, I went online, started doing some research, and then I ended up finding a chiropractor that was giving webinars out of California, and through that journey of just getting a deeper understanding of what health was something that I was never aware of, right? And the first thing that I never took the time to fathom was that, the body generates cells and loses cells every day, right? So the more the body loses cells than it generates, then the body creates disease. And the more cells that it generates versus that it loses, well, the body's in creation mode, therefore more at ease. And the story that was shared, this is the story that changed my life. And hopefully you could do the same for somebody else. So the chiropractor had mentioned the story about a Japanese man during the Second World War was able to heal himself by implementing 5 daily practices. And for me, I guess in my own ignorance, how can somebody 70, 75 years before be able to beat what modern technology, right? What modern medicine has to offer? But I wasn't the type to invest in, take the chances by taking pills that were highly toxic. And again, I've seen my mom for 20 years going more towards a holistic approach, even though, like I said, I think she only had a percentage of that recipe. The story continues that he was able to heal himself from the nuclear, from the atomic bomb, from the nuclear exposure that he had from the Americans bombing Japan during the Second World War. And he used 5 daily elements that are very, very simple. Every single day he would practice health and nutrition, proper sleep, prayer and meditation, exercise daily, and understand the physiology, right? The mind-body connection. And if we go into a little bit more scientifically, we could talk about how the nervous system works, right? So in my journey of wanting to staying away from modern medicine and taking toxic pills, I tried this holistic approach where I started practicing meditation, understanding how well I wasn't sleeping as well, right? So I wasn't able to regenerate properly. My nutrition prior to that was out the window. I was eating, foods that were not fueling my body, right? So the psychology of my nutrition had to change as well, versus before I would eat anything I want. And after going through that pain, well, I had to change my psychology and understand that food is fuel. So that's what I had to change in that aspect. And then, the more spiritual approach of I went through, starting practicing yoga and doing stretching exercises and, doing more studying in terms of a deeper understanding of how our body truly works, right? And not only on a physical level, on a metaphysical level as well. So that was my insights that led me to, within 9 months, I was able to heal myself from the inflammation that was caused to my body.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, but at the same time, when you think about it, it's pretty simple. I mean, a lot of these things, like you just said, are not really earth-shattering necessarily, and are not things that nobody's ever heard of. It's a lot of the basic stuff that we're told about health and wellness, but yeah, just because we're told it doesn't mean that we actually do it, and that's really the big difference.
In my opinion, this is my opinion, the more we're advancing with technology and whatnot, I think in some aspects we're actually going backwards. There's a lot of simple tools that were used over centuries that are part of who we are, that are part of the earth, that we're able to use still today to be able to, live a healthy, happy, joyous life with fulfillment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I think the biggest thing with technology is, there's a lot of more science and medicine advancing in terms of things like stem cells and regenerating and regrowing and different things like that. But at the same time, there's also a lot of, a lot more of us are being exposed to like the EMFs from the electronics, from spending too much time on our phones, too much time on our computers. We don't go outside as much. We don't meditate. We don't engage in the grounding. And a lot of the food that's at the grocery store is food that our great grandparents wouldn't even recognize as food. So,
Correct.
in some ways we are going backwards that way. And, we really should be, well, I guess I don't know, you guess you could say maybe forwards or backwards, depending on how you describe it. But we really should probably be going more backwards, I guess should be the way of saying to, more of these like ancient practices or, things that our great great grandparents did that have helped improve, health and well-being. Because quite frankly, the autoimmune epidemic, if you want to call it that, which I do think to a large degree it is an epidemic,
I
didn't
agree.
really exist in our great great grandparents' age. You didn't hear 100 years ago about 1 in 3 or 4 people getting diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. It just didn't happen.
No, and I definitely agree with you. And you know what I mean? Like again, when it comes to modern medicine, my experience, well, how I went through the system was, take pills. But the problem with pills is it's just, coating, sugar coating the outer area and actually not, has no benefit to what you're doing, right? So yeah, and I think as well, right? The root cause of any autoimmune disease all starts within our gut.
Mhm.
And once you're able to figure out how to heal your gut the best way possible, then all the symptoms of that pain, that inflammation goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit here, practically speaking, about how you did these 5 things. Did you like reach out and hire that chiropractor to help assist you with doing these things? Did you hire like another practitioner or a health coach, or were you just like a self-motivated person that said, gung ho, I can do this. Let me start working on these 5 different things to heal myself?
I definitely took a more spiritual approach. I did have two coaches. One was a life coach and one was a health practitioner that was just giving me nutritional insights of what's possible. For me, meditation, I didn't know anything about meditation before, so my life coach is who introduced me to meditation. And since then I do it on a daily practice. I just feel more grounded. I just think it helps me with my clarity, my focus on my daily actions. you know uh, that all depends on what you want to do for yourself. But again, by going through that physical pain and realizing that I needed massive change, it wasn't desperation, but I was ready to be opened to try anything else that I've never done before. But I also do believe in mentors, right? And having people guide you with their life experiences that are able to bring that into your life so you could continue your journey on a shorter course. My health nutritionist basically introduced me to prebiotics and probiotics, right?
Mhm.
And I was making my own homemade kefir, water kefir. And that's what I would
Well,
start by making, but understanding nutrition wise also, right? The water that we drink, tap water, in my opinion, it's not drinkable, right? So I had to figure
well,
out a way to make the purest water that I can, through using water filtration systems from home and whatnot. And then the next step was, you know, making my own water kefir at home. And then understanding, how the body works, that the body is a chemical factory, right? It takes something in and then it transforms it to something else, then digests it, and then it's released, right? And for me, it was eating more foods that were fermented, right? So obviously the water kefir, I would eat also on a regular basis sauerkrauts, kimchi. Those
mhm.
were just added to my diets. My initial diet, though, I was a little bit, more intense, more disciplined on what I did to detox my body. I did an all plant-based diet where for the first 3 weeks, all I was doing was eating oats in the morning, rice for lunch, and sweet potato for supper. That for me really detoxified my body. And then when I started introducing foods, that's when I started with, let's say, with the prebiotic, probiotic, with eating more sauerkraut and whatnot, and having more of a plant-based diet, and trying to avoid dairy, sugar and white flour, which what I call is like the three devils, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The three devils is a good way to describe it. They really are. I mean, and if you, for anybody that's listening to this, if you've seen like the Blue Zones documentary that came out recently on Netflix or read anything at all about the Blue Zones, you know that in the Blue Zones, they're not necessarily all plant-based. I mean, they do eat some meat, and I do personally feel like, as depending on the autoimmune condition, some people probably shouldn't be fully plant-based over the long term. They probably need some kind of meat for some of the minerals and nutrients and things like that are in it. But a lot of us in modern society have gone into too much processed meat. We've eaten way too much meat. We eat way too much dairy. We eat way too much sugar, processed foods, all that kind of stuff. And we don't eat the fermented foods. And I think the fermented foods and the prebiotics and probiotics are a big one, because that is actually another aspect of the Bloom Zones as well, is that a lot of them eat more of, like the sourdough bread and not the regular bread. And they eat the kimchi, like you mentioned, and the kefir, and they ferment a lot of their vegetables and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I found fermentation of probiotics to be real key to my healing as well. So yeah, definitely important things for sure.
That infamous leaky gut syndrome, right? That, I don't know, has been talked about for maybe the last 10, 15, 20 years, but like now really I feel like a lot of people are starting to pay attention to that. And again, if you're going through anything that's anything autoimmune, I highly recommend that you start researching and doing the necessary steps you need to start healing your gut.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, there's also been several books written about the connection between the gut and the mind and the brain and the spirit and all that kind of thing, and they really are interconnected. And truthfully, I think that's one of the reasons that some of, like acupuncture and some of the Chinese medicine, some of these ancient practices can be so helpful, is because they are focusing on that mind body spirit connection. Whereas that's another problem with our Western medicine and healthcare system, is that they're basically only focusing on your body. They forget about, the mind and the spirit, and they just go after the body alone, and that just doesn't do it for people.
And I think again, when I was looking at my mom, even though she took a holistic approach 20 plus years ago, taking natural products and, doing acupuncture and watching what she eats, I think she had maybe only 20, maybe 40% of that recipe, right? Through my findings with the 5 daily steps, personally for myself, that's how I found 100% of the recipe for me to be able to heal. Again, that's not the story for everybody, but in my perspective, that was the key that helped me. But it took the spiritual elements as well, and the deeper understanding as well, and the accepting, right, of what else is possible out there besides what I know. Because one of my mentors, one of my favorite mentors, always told me, he says, we're born all the same, and we're all born with these three elements. We're all born hungry, naked, and ignorant. Our families shelter us, right? Our families feed us, but it's our own job to make sure we're less ignorant in all areas of our life, right? And I'll be totally honest. Before I got sick, there were a lot of things concerning my health that I would totally not pay attention to because I was just busy being busy and didn't care until these signals came upon, and I had to go through that physical pain to say, oh, it's time for change.
Yeah.
And by sharing this story, I just hope that that can help anybody that's listening to this, for them to say, you know what, okay, it's time for change,
Yeah,
because that's
absolutely. That's
literally
a
what
good
it takes.
point. Yeah, absolutely. Time for change. And, you get an autoimmune diagnosis, boy, you realize that sooner or later. It can be the big wake-up call that sometimes you need to fix other aspects of your life. So, if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, that's great for you, you did all five of these things. If you could pick one, or maybe even just one baby step for somebody to get started with, if somebody's saying, okay, that's great, I realize I need to do all these things, but I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling sick and tired all the time. What would be the first step that you would say somebody should do?
I truly believe that we are programmable by design, right? So we are who we are because of our belief systems that were given to us in the first 7 years of our life, right? So I really think the first step is really, understanding the mind body connection and changing the old patterns that we have. right? The reason why we eat the way, or again, I always talk in my perspective, and then if anybody relates, the reason why I ate the way I ate was because of the patterns that I was taught, right?
Mhm.
And when I was able, again, that enlightenment, that shift, that paradigm for me was when I got that inflammation that created that shift for me. And then from there, that's when I decided to change my patterns. But I believe it all starts with mind. Everything starts in the mind,
Yeah.
works its way down.
Yeah, no, good point. I absolutely agree because, like you said, I mean, we can read all day long about what we're supposed to do. We can listen all day long to stories like yours, but if you don't actually have that attitude and that mindset with the mind and the spirit to begin with to say, okay, this is what I need to do, something there has to click a little bit to get you to finally actually take action and do something.
Yeah, uh, you know, for me, like I said, that story changed my life. I had a different career before. From then, I took care more of my health. I took care more of my spirit, and from that day on, my journey, my purpose changed. Right now, my journey is to help others, and I love what you do with your podcast, and that's why I just. I'm excited and I'm blessed to be on this podcast and having this conversation. Hopefully, we could reach the masses, but just the fact of wanting to help somebody else just brings so much fulfillment to our lives. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Great. And I think that's a great way to somewhat wind this down. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to reach out and talk to you or get in touch with you?
You could definitely reach out to me on my website, stevefurtado.com. That is STEVEFURTADO.com. Social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, Life Shift with Steve Furtado, or Life Shift with just my initials SF. You'll be able to find me on social medias as well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we'll have all those links down in the show notes before. Anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get around to?
No, I think this is a great conversation, a great conversation opener for a lot of people. And if we could just help one person, I think we've definitely completed a mission today.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everybody for listening. We invite you, like I said, to connect with Steve to learn a little bit more about his journey. And, I'm sure he'd probably be open to any specific questions that you'd want to reach out and ask, and it's available to help you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, comment, rate the episode, share it with anybody else that you think could benefit. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned, and we'd love to have you join us again next week for another episode of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast.